Hello and welcome to a Friday edition of Tisky Sour. We should warn you that we might get a little bit hazy as the show goes on because we're in a sort of ex-office block here and someone seems to be, I don't know, gluing something together or painting a room downstairs and it's smelling quite toxic up here.
It's like, it's definitely not, I think it's glue, it's not paint.
You think it's glue, not paint?
Yeah. So if Michael starts hallucinating in mid-show,
so
you know
one, we're making an excuse if we become a little bit less articulate as the show goes on, and two, or I suppose say something libelous, and two, this is obviously a segue to shout out that we want to move studio so that we don't have to sniff glue involuntarily whilst we are recording live YouTube shows.
Just involuntarily, of course, voluntarily.
Yeah.
We'll keep doing that.
Well, if you give us more than 15 grand, we'll obviously have a little bit extra to spend on treats.
Which won't be glue.
We're classier than that. In any case, we are now after one-off donations as well as your kind monthly donation. So if you want to give us a one-off donation for a studio, please give us a super chat, although YouTube do take a cut there. So go to our website and go to support.novaramedia.com for a one-off donation. As you already know, I'm here with Aaron Bastani.
How you doing, Michael?
A little bit hazy, as you say.
We haven't got hired together on a Friday for a long time. It's like being young again.
I'm still young.
You are young, I'm not young.
30, actually, I'm not that young. Okay, we're going to go to Boris Johnson's NorthernStrategy is going awry, and it is because he has come into contact with real human beings, not the human beings that live in Dominic Cummings' imaginary. He was out in Doncaster today. This was after a problematic day in Morley last week, which we covered on that Tisky Sour. So let's see his reception in Doncaster. We can get that video up now.
And it's all good now. We're going to leave the EU and everything's going to be great. It's just a fairy tale.
Oh, actually, we're putting a lot of...
But people have died because of austerity, and then you've got the cheek to come here and tell us austerity's over, and it's all good now. We're going to leave the EU and everything's going to be great. It's just a fairy tale.
Oh, actually, we're putting a lot of...
So this shows us, I think I've got a little bit of an echo there. Can we turn off the sound in? Perfect. This is showing us exactly what we were talking about last Friday. The Tories have a strategy of appealing to the north of England. They are going to be trying to take votes off Labour in their heartlands. The problem is the people in those traditional Labour heartlands don't seem to like the Conservatives very much, and they especially don't seem to like Boris Johnson very much. That's what we saw last week with the please go home guy. Phenomenally polite, but also very much to the point. And there today with a woman saying people have died because of austerity and you've got the cheek to come here. So she's saying he's going around there saying, look, I'm the guy who'll deliver Brexit. I am the man of the people. I am the man who's going to be putting money back into your schools and back into your hospitals. And this woman is quite rightly saying, I mean, this will be part of Labour's general election campaign, that you are the party that's responsible for austerity. Any reversal you are making to police cuts are reversals to cuts that you made. He's promised 20,000 extra cops, but that's precisely the amount that Theresa May took away. So I think in a way, hopefully, this new anti-austerity man of the people image that Boris Johnson and the current Conservatives are trying to give off won't be as successful as it was for Dominic Cummings in the Leave campaign. What do you think, Aaron?
Yeah, I think they're very different. I think there's a genuine default to lazy narratives in political journalism, political reporting. Why? Because you're dealing with very complicated and complex phenomena. So it's inevitable, right? But the reality is, the Brexit referendum 2016, and this isn't to cast any conclusive generalisations about what will or will not happen to Boris Johnson, but the reality is people of all political stripes, people who've never voted before, Labour voters, even Lib Dem and SNP voters, some voted Leave. About 30% of those two parties voted Leave. So the idea that if you're a Leave voter, you'll necessarily not just vote Tory, but vote for Boris Johnson, I mean, that's not an accurate statement. Also, we know lots of people who don't generally voted in that referendum in 2016, which is part of the reason why it commands this authority that, for some people is puzzling, but the reality is it was the largest democratic exercise in the history of Britain. So I think that's misguided. It may be right. I suspect it isn't. And also this idea that necessarily Northern England, because these places have been left behind because of deindustrialisation, yes, who powered that? It was the Tories. who was totemic of screwing over half the country to enrich the wealthy and what's viewed as the middle class of the South. It was Margaret Thatcher. The idea that this same party would then be seen instinctively as part of the solution. No. Labour could lose voters on the issue of Brexit. Possible. But it's going to be to the Brexit party. It's not going to be to the Tories. Firstly, because the Tories' position on Brexit isn't actually that clear, generally speaking, right? And then secondly, because they have this historical baggage which people just won't vote for.
And that's all anecdotal. So
that is all anecdotal.
No, but I'm going to give you the data now again.
Yeah.
So I mean, these videos that we're seeing of people haranguing Boris Johnson when he is up in northern towns he's trying to win, I think they're significant because they will go viral during the general election campaign, and I think they do significantly undermine, his image. So I think the fact that they happen, even if what they represent is somewhat shallow, is significant that these are videos that are being shared widely. Equally, you'll see the opposite position often presented on the BBC or on Newsnight, where they go to Grimsby or Doncaster and they meet people who say, I've been a lifelong Labour voter, I'll never vote for them again. I actually quite like this Boris Johnson guy because he's going to get us out of the EU. So it is difficult to get an idea of precisely what people are thinking from Vox Pops or politicians who are wandering around. Although it is interesting actually that this doesn't seem to happen to Jeremy Corbyn, other than from like far right nutters, who I do think that people don't quite rightly relate to.
I mean, it's just hard. It's hard to do it. It's hard to do it to people, right? Generally speaking, it's very hard to be nasty to somebody in the flesh and face to face. It's very hard. So I mean, it speaks to the extent to which Boris Johnson is an unlikable, dislikable person. Austerity, it's true. Austerity did kill 130,000 people. That is not some myth. It's not made up. It's a fact. It's been repeated, I think, in the BM by the Lancet.
It was first published in the British Medical Journal.
Yeah, but I think the Lancet. No, the Lancet is somewhere as regards to something else regarding austerity. The BMJ. These are very prestigious civil society institutions. This is not just made up in somebody's head. So people are justifiably angry about that. And the idea that Jeremy Corbyn's done some questionable things. He liked a Facebook post. Okay, we can say that was a bad move. We talked about that on the show. You can't compare that to 130,000 people dying because of government decisions. Come on.
I said I've got some social science to show why we might expect that the Tory strategy to win over voters in the Labour heartlands might struggle. This was from Paula Surridge, who is a political scientist at Bristol. She released this all today, and she made, I think, quite the strong point that when we look at the headline figures from YouGov, what that isn't very good at demonstrating is where undecideds might go. So the reason they fluctuate so much is because there are actually a lot of undecideds who, when they're on the phone, sometimes answer Labour, sometimes answer Tory, or a lot of the time answer they just don't know. Whereas if you want to look at where people might go, you have to ask about their political identities and particularly their political enemies, who they say they will never ever vote for. And luckily there is a source of, there is a data source where we can find this out about people. It's the British Election Studies, which is not done by one of these commercial market research firms. It's done by a consortium of universities and much bigger sample. And they ask lots of questions of people. It's an interesting data set to go through. And she is looking at the question of where are Labour leavers, where are Labour Remainers likely to go? And the same question about the Conservatives. So we're going to go through the Labour Party first, because this is obviously what's so central to the strategy that Boris Johnson is pursuing here. So she finds that of 2017 Labour voters, 37% were strong Remain, so people who identify strongly as Remainers. 24% were fairly strong Remain. 16% were neutral, 11% were fairly strong Leave, and 12% were very strong Leave. So it's really these 12% of very strong Leavers and 11% of fairly strong Leavers that the Conservatives are going to be going for. And the reason why that could be significant, even though we might think that's a relatively small proportion of the electorate, is because of the way they are distributed in the population. So that 12% will presumably be overrepresented in Doncaster as opposed to Brixton. But why Paula Surridge thinks that the Conservatives should be worried is that in all of these groups, so very strong Leave to very strong Remain, an overwhelming majority, say that they would never vote Tory. So they're asked, what are the chances that you would vote Conservative at the next general election? And a majority in all categories give 0 out of 10. So people who, if they can't imagine voting Conservative, it's unlikely they will. If they tell you at this point they're not likely to vote Conservative, maybe they will. But if they say, I just can't imagine doing it, It is unlikely. Among strong Leavers, so that's precisely the people that Boris Johnson is going to be going for here, only 12% say the likelihood of voting Tory is 6 out of 10 or higher. So you're looking at really quite a small pool of people there. I mean, in many seats that could be decisive, but it's not you're not going to see a huge avalanche of supporters going over to Boris Johnson's Conservative Party. Some more do go to the Brexit Party. So this is where you will see, I think, something that's going to be so interesting coming into this election in terms of the opposition is the way that the Tories and the Brexit Party work together informally. I think it's clear at this point that there will be no formal pact, but it could be the case that the Conservatives go less hard in places where they think the Brexit Party might do well. So of Labour leavers, people who are strong leavers, 40% say they could imagine voting for the Brexit Party, gave over 6 out of 10 in terms of when they were asked, would you consider voting for the Brexit Party? And that was only in March, so that was before they had that huge explosion in the polls, and 20% of fairly strong Labour leavers said the same. The Remainers, and this now comes into Labour's strategy, of strong Remainers who make up a huge proportion, 37% of Labour voters, 45% give their likelihood of voting Lib Dem as 6 out of 10 or higher. So they seem to be much more, basically the Lib Dems in most of the country are a greater threat than the Conservatives. How seriously do you take this kind of data? Do you think that the Tories' strategy project of winning over Labour leavers is going to be as hard as this suggests?
Well, it didn't happen in 2015, did it? If you look at...
You mean 2017?
No, not 2015 general election, because UKIP got nearly 4 million votes, right? And it was, in some senses, that was mobilising a certain electorate around the issue of Brexit. More so than 2017, strangely. UKIP obviously collapsed post-2016. UKIP came second, I think, in 121 seats. But how many did they win? And where they did very well was in the south. It wasn't in the north. They didn't take any seats off Labour. They got 4 million votes nationally. Now, realistically, I think that's the best that the Brexit Party can hope for. I think they'll get lots of second places. And I think they'll replace the Tory party or the Lib Dems as the second party in many of these Labour heartlands. They may win 1 or 2 seats, Barnsley or Bolsover. But I can't see a major breakthrough of 20, 30 seats. Because as we saw in Peterborough, and look, by-elections are tailor-made for these kinds of parties. As we saw in Peterborough, where Labour won, they won despite the candidate going to prison. They won despite an ongoing national campaign against Jeremy Corbyn saying his Brexit position's terrible. All of that, Labour still won. So if they can win it, and they won despite the Lib Dems and the Greens running campaigns against them. So if they can keep Peterborough, I imagine the Brexit Party will struggle to take many seats off them. However, they will be a variable. Could it be the difference between Labour forming a majority or not? Potentially, maybe. Maybe there are a few seats where the Brexit Party would be the difference between, Labour winning a seat or not winning a seat. How many will the Brexit Party actually take off Labour? I don't think that many. And in that respect, I think you're right. The Liberal Democrats are far more important as a variable. And again, it wouldn't be because the Lib Dems are going to take seats off them. It's because there are lots of seats out there where the Lib Dems presently are third or even fourth. And, they would say only we can win here. Because obviously everybody talks about fake news and Donald Trump and lying in politics as if it's a new thing. But anybody who's familiar with the Liberal Democrat leaflet knows that it isn't really. So in, for instance, Ruislip, Boris Johnson's seat, the Lib Dems in 2017 got 4% of the vote. I think Labour got maybe 10 times that. I don't think 40% of the vote. They got a really high vote. It's now a marginal.
But there'll still be a flyer saying Lib Dems are winning here.
Yeah, the Lib Dems say only we can beat Boris. Labour need to step aside, even though they literally lost their deposit in the last general election. So, and it's the extent of that lying and their strategy on Brexit, which I think could really undermine Labour. So it makes perfect sense to tack in this direction and to view the Liberal Democrats as a bigger threat than the Brexit Party or the Tories, particularly in the north.
I was just looking this up about Barnsley, because I think the reason you mentioned Barnsley is because we were both speaking to Craig Gent, who is a brilliant articles editor at Novara Media. So hi, if you're watching. He was telling us on Wednesday, I think, that he's from Barnsley, that the Brexit Party could be a real threat there because of the amount of votes they got in the European elections. And I think that's very significant. It's something we've got to consider, which is 23,500 they got compared to Labour's 7,000. Obviously, Labour collapsed in those elections. But I just wanted to check actually whether that was much more than what UKIP got in 2014. So the same elections, but in a different time, that was 19,000.
You keep talking, Michael.
Oh, you're going away, are you?
Oh, no, I'm not, because somebody's complaining about my camera, so I'm just going to check.
Ah.
Carry on.
So yeah. Well, you've got me off. You've got me off guard now.
Are you freestyling?
Yeah. let's go to... So we've looked at where people might be voting. Let's look a bit more into the Conservative Party's, whether what they are saying to try and win these towns is anything other than bullshit. You probably won't be surprised that we think it's kind of bullshit. So we are going to go to the Manchester Evening News. So this is what Boris Johnson was talking about when he was in Barnsley. He was saying, so if you watch the longer video with that woman who was telling him, what are you doing here? You caused austerity. He was saying, look, I'm here to give you billions of pounds. I'm actually going to invest in all of these towns. I'm going to throw money at your schools. I'm going to throw money at your hospitals. And obviously a question which arose when the Tories announced this policy, their 100 towns, 100 left behind areas, was that this looked a lot like electioneering. It looked like they were targeting money precisely at those towns where they see the next election being won or lost. So at their targets. So we can look, I'm just going to read actually out some of this article, which is very good, from the Manchester Evening News. So our workings show 94 out of the 100 towns of the ones which the Tories have targeted as the towns which need this extra investment are in Leave voting areas, mostly in the North or Midlands. The remaining 6 Remain-leaning towns, Cheadle, Glastonbury, Southport, St Ives, Morley and Lewis, are all in marginal Conservative constituencies, set to be Liberal Democrat targets, or in the case of Morley and Outwood, a Labour target, having been very narrowly lost by them in 2015. In fact, nearly a quarter of the 100 towns serve some of the most knife-edge seats in the country, those requiring a 1% swing or less, or even less, to move them from Labour to Tory or vice versa. These include Peterborough, Crewe, Bishop Auckland, Bedford, Ipswich, etc., etc. The government insists it has used various selection criteria to pick the winners, taking into account productivity, deprivation and investment opportunities. But of course, they have not made these criteria public. So it's going into a mysterious black box. So there's people in the Treasury deciding where desperately needs extra investment from our government, goes into a black box and magically comes out with precisely those towns that the Conservatives want to win at the next general election. In America, they'd call it pork barrel politics. You pump money precisely into those places where you want to win. And it is not part of an overall economic strategy. It has nothing to do with economic justice or productivity or a sensible industrial policy. It is literally trying to buy votes.
Yeah, it's a bit like the DUP policy, but writ large for large towns.
But pre-election, right?
Yeah.
So that was post-election where they had to get the DUP people to... How much did they give? £1 billion to elect to 10 MPs, wasn't it? £1 billion to buy 10 MPs, £100 million for each constituency in Northern Ireland that the DUP represent.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen recently. Portsmouth High Street is a mess.
Do you know if Portsmouth are included?
Portsmouth is included, and if you look at it's the marginal Portsmouth South. Stephen Morgan won it in 2017. They would want to win that back, I presume. They would need to win seats like that back if they want to form the next government. And then you've got Penny Mordaunt in Portsmouth North, bit safer, about 8,000. But that's the classic area. If they want to form a majority, they're going to have to win places like Mansfield, Portsmouth. I'm trying to think, what's the typical area? Hastings. I don't know if Hastings is included. Sort of large town or a small city, where frankly they've been utterly decimated as a result of austerity, the economy going nowhere for 10 years, and that intersects with what's happened with changing consumption habits, the emergence of the internet. These are big questions that need to be resolved, like you say, with a coherent industrial policy. It can't be, let's give 5 million for a bike lane and an extra street sweeper. That's not going to help it, sadly. If it was that simple, great. It's not. We need to have a conversation about what high streets are really for.
And I mean, this is an argument that the Labour Party are going to have to get really good at, because what you're going to see in this election is the Tories saying, we've pumped money into schools. Well, not we've pumped, because it hasn't gone there yet, but they'll be trying to say you can't make the same argument you made against Theresa May to us because we have funded the NHS, or we've promised to fund the NHS and promised schools. And Labour are going to have to get really good at saying, look, this is not an economic policy. This is piecemeal. It's us who have a strategy for how to transform the economy so that it works for the many, not the few, and increase the power of labour against capital. The kind of things that the Tory party will never be able to do, even if they can pick out of a hat £1 billion to go to this pork barrel project, or £1 billion to go to schools over here.
I mean, here's the thing. So I'll go back to Portsmouth. Portsmouth is, it's included in this fund. Portsmouth lost its Marks and Spencer a year or two ago. Now, people might laugh at this, but these are big employers, right? It lost to Marks and Spencer, and it had been there for a very long time. It's just had a John Lewis shut down on the other side of town there. That store had been there for more than 140 years, I believe. Opposite the John Lewis, Debenhams. that's shutting down. A bit further away, Blackwell's, a bookstore, that's shut down. This is a really big challenge to local economies. And if people want to understand why Brexit happened, why you're seeing the rise of the far right in places like the United States, we don't just need to talk about income inequality, which we do. We also need to talk about regional inequality. Because, politicians, they walk down Tottenham Court Road, they walk down Oxford Street, and yes, there is in-work poverty. Yes, there's deprivation in places like Islington. But these are prosperous places. It's very easy to not see that for what it is.
They're prosperous places with a lot of not prosperous people. It's important to say there's a lot of economic deprivation amongst households in these places, but the high street is vibrant and there's life there.
You can find a job, even if it's not living wage. You can find a job very easily. Public services work pretty well, right? It works. Things work. You go to Derby. Have you been to Derby recently?
I haven't been to Derby since Derby transformed.
I went to Derby recently because obviously the book I'm doing a lot of promotion. And it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And what was striking for me with Derby was you've got these beautiful historic buildings from 200-300 years ago, which are empties, or they're Cytex to stop squatting. I'm used to seeing Cytex in the south with sort of like buildings that are 40 years old, an ex-council building from the 1970s. And you're like, wow, if this was in Manchester, in London, or one of these sort of really, these are the places now that draw capital towards them. Again, I'm not saying workers are getting anything from that necessarily, but they're getting capital. They're creating jobs, right? But there's nothing like that there. And the left has to understand that unless we have a coherent offer about work and urban life in these areas as well, particularly the large towns, we're going to go nowhere. And that's not just about economics. It's also about culture. Why do people live in Newcastle? Why does Newcastle exist? The industries it was built on: shipbuilding, weapons manufacture, coal mining. All three are gone. So you've got several 100,000 people in the northeast. They didn't choose to be there. It was an urban centre that was built on, these three industries which no longer exists. And the sort of Blairite response was cultural industries. We'll have a square mile where you have the Baltic Gallery, you'll have some nice cafes, a Michelin star restaurant. That's not going to work. And so I think we need a response to those problems, which isn't that. Part of Labour's engaging with that, with the Preston model and so on, but we have to go far beyond that. We have to go far beyond that. And I think the default reflex at the moment for a lot of Corbynites is to say, this problem doesn't even exist. Actually, there isn't this divide between London and the rest of the country. There is, let's be real. It's not just London. And also another one is, it's not just London that voted Remain. It's Oxford. Okay, yeah, you're kind of making the point here. It was Cambridge. Yeah, you're still making the point. It was Manchester, Liverpool. Yeah, these are large urban areas with lots of graduates, lots of capital flowing into them. Most of the country, most of England, outside of the major cities, doesn't look like that. The left has to have a response.
And what would that response be? Something like the Preston model. So you sort of have...
I think Preston model amped up, but also with national investment banks, regional investment banks, right, pumping money into these areas, not just for infrastructure, right? Because again, the Blairite sort of default is build a new public library, or not even an ideas centre, build some train tracks, because of course the best thing about a rundown town is to get the fuck out of there. What we would say instead is, no, socialised finance to fund worker-owned business, cooperatively owned business, businesses that can meet the contractual obligations they would have under the Preston model. So the catering, the cleaning, the security contracts for the local hospital should be met by worker-owned businesses. And the high street increasingly might not be Identikit, Cafe Nero, Costa, Starbucks, gambling shop, betting shop, takeaways, McDonald's. Some of those are fine. They're going to exist, right? Preferably not the gambling, or they shouldn't be there at all.
But you don't need two Costas on the same road.
You don't. And increasingly, you would hope that a worker-owned business that is making sandwiches for the school at the road would be taking that shop front instead. And so I think that's the kind of model we should be looking to.
Should we go to Tom Watson and the Lib Dems' kooky Brexit position?
Go on.
So as you know...
Bit of light relief,
yeah. So as you know, I'm not entirely satisfied with where Labour's Brexit position is at the moment, partly because I think by clinging to this frame of renegotiation, it seems like they might drag the process on. And also, I don't like this idea of indecision. So they say, we'll wait and see which one we back. I'd much prefer either every MP to say we'll back Remain, or they'll back a sort of common market 2.0 style deal, or Jeremy Corbyn, if he wants, could say I'll stay neutral like Harold Wilson. But what I don't like is the we'll wait and see. But what is undoubted, what can't be doubted, is that they have come quite close, very close. I mean, they've basically done everything the People's Campaign wanted of them. They've said, we will back a second referendum, and in that second referendum, Remain will be on the ballot. And indeed, most of the cabinet will be supporting Remain, the option that the people want. So you might expect that some of Corbyn's bigger critics on this issue would now be rallying around the Labour Party saying, look, this is, if we want to get the outcome that we want, which is a second referendum where we get the chance to campaign for Remain, that's what Alistair Campbell, that's what Tom Watson, that's what Joe Swinson have all said they've wanted. They should be now rallying around saying, yeah, this was a good move by him. Obviously, we don't expect the Lib Dems to say vote Labour, but you might expect them to welcome this development. That's not what happened. I mean, you might not be surprised at that. Let's go first of all. We'll do the Lib Dems first. So on Monday night, they backed Revoke Article 50. So from moving, I mean, I think for about a year now, they've had a position of a second referendum and back Remain. Bollocks to Brexit, stop Brexit, whatever. But it was always going to be via a second plebiscite. They've now said, no, we don't need another vote. We're just going to get into government when they're a majority, which is part of the plan. I mean, they already think they are the opposition. So Chuck Ullman has shadow foreign secretary on his Twitter account.
They are fantasists.
Whoever is it Ed Davey who's the shadow chancellor now at this point? I don't know.
They are fantasists. So maybe they have like 20 MPs and they'll be like, we are now the government. You're like, this is even worse than Dominic Cummings.
I did check Joe Swinson's Twitter today because I thought the logical conclusion of this is that she has leader of the opposition on her Twitter, but she doesn't have that because I think maybe that was
a constitutional role. So she would have.
Isn't shadow foreign secretary a constitutional role?
No, a leader of the opposition is you'd be in the Privy Council, right? So I mean, I presume
but shadow home secretary is in the Privy Council.
I have no idea, but I think leader of the opposition is. Well, you can attend, right? You technically don't go if the government's there and telling the Queen what to do, but because she's not meant to have contrasting opinions in front of her, she's not meant to have political debates. But I can imagine Joe Swinson sort of walking into the Privy Council. The Queen's there, Boris is there, just like, hello, I'm the leader of the opposition. Very strange lady.
In any case, what do you think about this Revoke Article 50 from the Lib Dems? I mean, I'm guessing you're not supporting it, but how do you think this is going to play out politically?
Brilliant. Don't you think that? I mean, it's great. It's
great for Labour.
It's completely mad, isn't it?
It's wacky. I mean, yeah. I mean, I think.
What do you think's going to happen? Like the only way we close the lid on this thing, right, is either you get a deal. People are going to complain, but you'll get a deal, or you have another referendum and people vote to Remain, or people vote for the deal that's on that second ballot. Revoke's not going to stop anything. You'll just we'll have European parliamentary elections again. The Brexit Party will have a clean sweep again. That element of the conversation won't just disappear. I know these people on like the Remainiacs podcast and all these people with these huge Twitter followings and AC Grayling. I don't think it'll just go away if you don't allow them to legislate for Brexit, but it won't. There's a large social constituency that believes this stuff. And the reason why we had the referendum in the first place is because they became sufficiently mobilised after the 2015 general election to put Tories under the cosh. That would only happen again. So I don't really understand the idea of Revoke. And also it completely buys into this frame of not just being undemocratic, being anti-democratic. The establishment closing down, the only channels by which people can express popular dissent. So it's crazy. And it's not cathartic. If you want an end to this, which we all want, Revoke is not the way to do it. And also, it undermines the people's vote thing. Now, if the Lib Dems go into general election saying we want a second referendum, people would be like, well, how can I trust you that you would respect that referendum when 10 minutes ago you were saying you just want to revoke? Surely if we have another referendum and you lose, you'll ask for a third and a fourth and a fifth. Because the point here isn't democracy from your point of view. It's about stopping Brexit. So I think they've not just screwed themselves over. I think they've screwed over the kind of people's vote thing quite a bit as well. And I think a lot of their voters will think that. I think they'll say, this is a really backward step in terms of what I care most about. A lot of the people that voted for them in the European elections don't give two tosses about the Lib Dems. They care about Brexit. They care about not having no deal. They care probably about just stopping it altogether. And I think the majority of them will see this as counterproductive.
I mean, unless they get 52% of the votes, I mean, it is difficult to see how you have a mandate to just completely cancel Brexit. I mean, why I think it's good for the Labour Party is because, I mean, clearly the logic behind this is they're worried that they're going to get not so much outflanked by the Labour Party, but if the Labour Party go for a people's vote and suggest or most of them will campaign for Remain, then the Lib Dems lose their raison d'etre. So they sort of moved to this more extreme Remain position in the hope that will make, again, them the party of the Remainers. But I don't think there are many people in the public. I mean, I do need to check the polling on this, actually. I'm not sure if it has been polled because it was such a marginal position for a while. This idea of just revoking it straight off, I think that will alienate people.
I think it's about 25%, I think.
But who just want to revoke outright?
Yeah. Yeah,
I suppose, I mean,
so it's like
I think that's a significant section of the population, but I mean, maybe the argument can be made quite...
Well, nothing has a majority. In the defence of that position, nothing has a majority, right? But what tends to have a plurality is Remaining, right?
Yeah.
But then the vast majority, but that's only like 46%. Unless you put the two together, Remain versus Leave, then it tends to have a majority.
Yeah.
But if you have your preferable outcome here, nothing has an overall majority. Remain has a plurality, but the primary means of achieving that tends to be a second referendum.
I mean, something that's interesting is that the People's... I mean, I haven't listened to the Remainiacs podcast in a while, but it would be interesting to see actually what the People's Vote, team are saying about this kind of thing at the moment, because obviously...
But they've not said anything, have they?
Well, it seems like they've gone completely quiet.
Because there's two camps.
They didn't do much in the Stop the Coup movement, so
Yeah.
it seems like they're taking a step back and they're seeing what happens. Because I don't think they've endorsed Joe Swinson's let's just completely revoke position, which means that you could end up with the People's Vote campaign rallying behind Labour at the next general election, which I don't think we should, give over our campaign to them, but I don't think their support is going to be particularly damaging to us.
No, I think that's just, as a neutral observation, I think that's entirely correct. I think what Labour's position now is far more consonant with what the People's Vote sort of, I say movement, it's obviously an organisation as well. There is a formal organisation with headquarters and staff, etc. What Labour are now saying is far more consonant with what they've been demanding than what the Lib Dems are proposing.
Well, this will be interesting,
It's
actually.
very madcap. I think it's almost just like, for me, it showed, the great thing with Labour is, look, it takes a long time to change the direction on policies within Labour. The reason being it's a democratic organisation with a mass membership and competing interests, trade unions, different factions, etc. With the Liberal, and that's a strength, by the way. With the Liberal Democrats, it's like very much on the fly. Joe Swinson and two advisors probably like, you know what? We've made them move this far. Let's do it again. Because sometimes you outride, and that's how things work. You can't just consistently say we'll outride. Otherwise, you could just have the most wacky left-wing position on everything, which in Navarro's defence, sometimes we do, but that doesn't achieve very much normally, So I think it really helps Labour, the Lib Dems having done this. Could be wrong, but that's my instinct.
Yeah, I was just thinking about I remembered I'm actually subscribed to the People's Vote, daily email. I don't check it as often as I should, for journalistic reasons. I mean, I'm not a signed up campaigner for this group, but I've just looked at their latest one. It says they've got 121 coaches that are going to the People's Vote march on the 19th of October, so in 2 Saturdays' time. And
19th of October?
Yeah.
That's a month away, right?
Oh, shit, I was thinking of the 19th of September. Okay, so a month and a half away. So unless they change the name of their campaign, this is going to be hundreds of thousands of people marching for People's Vote, not marching to revoke Article 50. And the one thing that... I mean, I wandered down to one of those People's Vote marches just sort of to take videos a while ago. And one thing that did impress me was, like, to be honest, this is a big... Obviously, I didn't like anyone on the stage. Well, I don't mind David Lammy, but there's Anna
Which
Soubry
one was that?
I can't remember precisely when it was. It wasn't
way back.
It wasn't the one where they said we've got 1 million people. It was one where they sort of had 200,000 people. But I remember being there and thinking, like, wow, this is actually a large number of people who feel quite passionately about something. And it did feel a bit, awkward or uncomfortable that these were, this seemed like a movement, a movement that was, and from seeing past movements, the 2010 movement, you can see that these are actually meaningful forces in British politics. And if you have this meaningful force in British politics of people who are networking, forming, political connections and political identities, which are completely separate from the Labour Party, that is a danger.
The Countryside Alliance did that. I mean, it doesn't mean that just because something's a movement. This is where the left's instincts have historically been strange. In the last 10 years, are quite strange. Just because all the social movements which have come from the streets and come from civil society happen to have had left-wing sort of demands or a disposition, doesn't mean that's inherently how they work. The Countryside Alliance had a huge demonstration during the Blair years, or the fuel protests, which almost got rid of the Labour government. There wasn't some of it, not all of it. There was in some areas quite a right-wing political agenda attached to that. I'm
not saying it's progressive. I'm not saying that makes it progressive. I'm saying that makes it a powerful political force.
Sure, but I think also Labour in government, or the left, potentially in power, has to get accustomed to the idea of mass social movements in opposition to them, which we're completely unprepared for, because that's what the left has been doing for the best part of 30 to 40 years. Since Thatcher, the left has been characterised by protest, and we've never had to be... Blair effectively wasn't really the left in power, let's be real, and even then protest was quite minimal. It was just really the fuel protests and the Countryside Alliance. So I take your point. But also what's interesting is that the Stop the Coup demo, the largest one on a Saturday in London, about 40,000 people. John McDonnell got huge cheers.
It's still much smaller. No, I think the Stop the Coup protest came about at exactly the right time. It meant that Labour could, I suppose, ride that wave, as it were, in a way that they'd missed previous ones. But this whole idea that the Stop the Coup demo was so much better than the People's Vote ones. I mean, the People's Vote ones had 1 million people, and the Stop the Coup ones, well, it wasn't 1 million. It was like 400,000.
Let's say it was a couple 100,000.
Yeah, but I mean that was a bigger movement.
Had huge money
the People's Vote movement was a bigger movement than the Stop the Coup movement.
Yeah, but they had huge amounts of money and it's like the Stop the War, right? It was huge amounts of money and preparation, etc., and coordination, which Stop the Coup didn't have. And I saw the response that John McDonnell got at Stop the Coup. I'm absolutely certain if there was a People's Vote demo, he'd get a similar one.
Well, that's exactly what I'm saying. I think it's significant if John McDonnell can stand up there and say, we are going to have a people... Yeah. Well, I don't think Jeremy Corbyn would want to speak there.
No, he also shouldn't, because he wants to be the Prime Minister. He wants to be the Prime Minister for everybody. But, I think John McDonnell would get a very warm reception.
Let's go on to another kooky Brexit position, or a contrarian Brexit position. So this is from... I mean, I'd say everyone's favourite contrarian, but I don't think there's not much love within the Labour Party anyway for its deputy leader. We're going to look at Tom Watson's speech on the subject. So we can get that up now.
The Prime Minister is desperate for a general election because he thinks it is the only escape route from the prison and solitude he has chosen for himself. He and his scorched earth advisers have backed themselves into a corner and they see no other way out. An election might well be in the interests, or in his interests, although I doubt he will win it when it comes. But that doesn't make Brexit or a Brexit election desirable, far from it. A general election should never be decided on a single issue.
Does not compute.
Coming up with his latest contrarian position. I've got an echo. It's gone again. So what Tom Watson is saying is that the Labour Party has now shifted to a position of campaigning for a people's vote with Remain on the ballot, something he's been arguing for over a year, I think. He is actually someone who I think does speak at these people's votes rallies and enjoys the huge round of applause he gets for being the person in the Labour Party who's representing their views. Now he's just so happens coincidentally changed his mind after the Labour front bench has agreed on a policy which was much closer to his original position. So now he is saying that no, it's not good enough for in our manifesto to be a second referendum in which Remain is on the ballot. What we want to do is avoid a general election and make sure that there is a second referendum before the general election can happen. So essentially what he's arguing for is the formation of some kind of government of national unity who then legislates to have a second referendum before the general election takes place. And he's arguing this. I mean, you see loads of Labour MPs arguing this to basically say, the subtext of what they say is basically, we want to Remain, but we don't think Jeremy Corbyn's very good. So we want to separate the issue of staying in the EU from a Labour government. I mean, that's obviously not the line you're supposed to take if you're deputy leader of the Labour Party, but Tom Watson has a somewhat ersatz understanding of what the role of a deputy leader of a political party is. I mean, for me, the reason this doesn't work is, one, it's completely implausible, and the only reason he's saying it is because he wants to have a different opinion to Jeremy Corbyn. There is not a majority, there never has been a majority in Parliament for a second referendum. But even if there were, I think the big issue here is, what do you have as the alternative? And actually, even why do you have Remain on the ballot? Because, I mean, I think a second referendum, I didn't used to support it. Now I think it's the only option for Labour to go into a general election with. But I think you do need a mandate to have that. I mean, David Cameron had a mandate for the 2016 EU referendum because he won a majority in 2015. If you just overthrow the government, I mean, let's not call it overthrow the government, but if you create a new government who implements a policy which wasn't in most of their manifesto.
Well,
so it wasn't in the
80% of MPs were elected on a platform of implementing some kind of Brexit, right?
So they are going to be...
That doesn't mean we have to implement Brexit, because like you say, it hasn't worked out that way. But the idea that you without going back to the people for a mandate on another referendum, I mean, that's crazy.
You just radically shift policy after changing the Prime Minister. I mean, it's a recipe for disaster. Also, what do you have as the alternative option? And I think this is one of the most significant things, because if I used to think that maybe you'd need to have no deal on the option, so that no deal on the ballot, so that every position is represented. Actually, I think that if the Labour Party are going into an election with, it will be Remain versus some kind of credible Leave option, I think it might as well be May's withdrawal agreement. Yeah. But I know they want to sort of add a few things onto it. Then you've got a mandate for what's going to be on the ballot paper, and people might say, oh, but then you don't have no deal represented. It's like, well, if you want no deal, don't vote Labour. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes you just have to say that. We as a party can't offer something for everyone. We offer a platform in our manifesto, and then we deliver it. Whereas if you have this referendum before a general election, then what is your justification for not having a harder Brexit than May's deal on the ballot paper? They are going to impose Remain versus May's deal without having any mandate from the public to rule out no deal or to rule out a much harder Brexit than May's deal. So to me, it seems like a non-starter, which he's obviously doing for partisan factional reasons. Before you go, should we go to the responses within the Labour Party?
Yeah, go on, that's funny.
Because it is harder to, I think, better the responses than were given by Corbyn, McDonnell and McCluskey this week. So we'll go to that now.
I don't accept it and I don't agree with it. Our priority is to get a general election in order to give the people a chance to elect a government that cares for them, not themselves.
But Tom has a track record of being a bit of a contrarian, and so I work on the basis. Thanks, Tom, for your ideas, but that's Tom.
Now and again, Tom pops up from wherever he's been hiding and comes up with something. Instead of supporting his leader, it's normally to try and undermine him. And I don't know why he does it. Less and less people listen to him. If he wants to continue to languish on the fringes of the Labour Party, that's up to him. But his views don't really matter anymore.
Thanks, Tom. That's Tom. That's the best bit. We often complain about the Labour Party not having enough message discipline. When it comes to Tom Watson, the front bench, I mean, have it in abundance.
Well, it's not. It's the complete opposite of message discipline. So there's a character on the Fast Show, and it's a mid-1990s.
No, but what I'm saying is McCluskey, McDonnell and Corbyn have message discipline. Yeah. When they're asked about Tom Watson, they all say, like...
Well, they've always got message discipline.
They always say, we don't care about this guy. No, but sometimes they get sort of taken astray, you know. So sort of like, I would prefer them to more clearly stay on economic inequality and the fact that they're going to rebuild Britain and sort of answer questions.
You
very
want them
simply
to do the Bernie Sanders thing?
I want them to do Bernie Sanders.
So basically, it's like, and I've actually been.
But this was more like Bernie Sanders. These were answers that he could have done.
No. Bernie Sanders was like, "What do you make of Tom Watson?" He's like, "Look, Tom Watson can say what he wants. The big thing we need to talk about is that the economy isn't working." That's what Bernie Sanders does. Like, I've been thinking about this a lot. So if you get asked on Sky or the BBC, and you know, should Jeremy Corbyn have liked this Facebook post, you know, that wall painting, that mural? The answer should have been, no, it's bad. He's apologised. I think it definitely has racist undertones. But I really want to talk to you today about the fact that 16 million people in this country have less than £100 in their bank account. I think that's a bigger problem. That's what Bernie Sanders would do. And so, that's now it. We now need to shoehorn the economy, falling living standards, fracturing and fragmenting public services into absolutely
every answer.
Every single answer from the media. Which they should have done it there. Why not? If there's a camera, start talking about in-work poverty.
Something that Tom Watson will never, ever do.
But he doesn't care.
You'll never see anyone on the Labour right do this. The amount of times, you know, sometimes you scroll through the Twitter feeds of Labour MPs and you see the amount of time they've ever talked about a talking point which is helpful to the Labour Party is zilch. And all they ever tweet about is, I mean, sometimes they tweet about Boris Johnson as a liar, a kind of sort of like centrist.
Well, because they can do moralising. They can do
moralising about the opposition. They just can't really argue for anything other than, I suppose, criticising. Sometimes they criticise their other backbencher friends, don't they? So say brilliant speech by Stella Creasy or something, but they'll never sort of go for a talking point, which is about the Labour Party.
But are you familiar with the Fast Show?
I saw that clip you shared.
Yeah, so the Fast Show for viewers was a 1990s comedy, and I was a kid, but I remember some of it. And there was, and actually a lot of it's relevant to the present political context, because you've got the guys, it's very, very drunk, and that's basically most people in the House of Lords. But there was also a character played by Paul Whitehouse called Indecisive Dave. And he'd have his two mates at the pub. One would say one thing, he'd agree. Then the other one would say another thing, he'd agree. And he basically didn't have a mind of his own. And I'm thinking perhaps if we were to have a sort of political satire on the BBC, one character would be Contrarian Tom.
Yeah.
And basically you'd have Jeremy Corbyn there talking to, you know, Tom Watson in the House of Commons cafe or bar. And Jeremy Corbyn would say one thing. Hey, Tom, I've been thinking about what you're, you know, proposing in regards to a people's vote. I think it's a really good idea. Well, actually, no, I think a people's vote's a shit idea. We shouldn't do it. And I think you should resign. And then Jeremy Corbyn would say, you know what, Tom, I've been thinking about it. And you're right. I'm going to resign as leader of the Labour Party. And then Contrarian Tom would say, no, I'm going to resign as deputy leader. So rather than all these hashtags about Tom Watson resign, because he's Contrarian Tom, what we actually need to say is Tom for leader. Tom Watson for leader of the Labour Party, because then he's such a contrarian, he will resign as deputy leader of the Labour Party. He may even resign the whip. He may even leave the Labour Party altogether, because that's how he works. Anything the left says, anything that Jeremy Corbyn says, he has to say the complete opposite. So we have to stop saying Watson resign. We say Watson for leader.
That's true. That's good. Because often people ask, in the comments or on Twitter, how do we get rid of Tom Watson? I mean, the boring answer is you have to persuade 20% of the PLP to back a challenger who will then take him on in a deputy leadership challenge. But I mean, given the constitution of the PLP, that can seem at times difficult. They don't necessarily want to have that fight. So yours seems like a much more, bloodless, peaceful, consensual way, actually, of getting rid of Tom Watson.
Watson for PM.
Very good. Let's go on to trigger ballots briefly. I mean, we've talked about this, I think, on last Friday's show at length. I mean, ultimately, it's been a little bit disappointing. I mean, we've talked about how there are a bunch of Labour MPs who don't really do very much to further the cause of the Labour Party entering government. There are people like Tom Watson who seem to actively choose positions purely because they are not the official Labour Party position. These are people who aren't necessarily adding that much value on the Labour benches. And the hope was that because conference, I think it was last year, made it slightly easier to trigger a selection of your MP. So it used to be 50% of member organised. It's all a bit complicated, but basically it's got easier to trigger your MP. You can watch previous videos if you love the detail, if you're that kind of person. I am, obviously. But members aren't doing it. It's kind of disappointing. Tom Watson has been reselected. Neil Coyle has been reselected. And I don't know what's going on, because we do have a mobilised left-wing membership who do definitely feel, dissatisfied by many of their representatives. Why are they keeping their position as representatives of our movement? What's going on?
Trigger ballot process is inherently negative. People don't like negative campaigning, especially face-to-face, especially with people they know. You have to go to branch meetings with people that you may be friends with or associates with, you campaign with. It's going to be very difficult for you to go leafleting with somebody, and then 2 days later, they back the incumbent MP. You say, I don't. I think we should have a reselection. And it might not even be because you don't like the MP. You just believe in the idea of mandatory selection. So it was always going to fail. And this was a typically Corbynite compromise. That's not to say I'm attacking Jeremy Corbyn. I'm saying it is emblematic of the kinds of compromises which have been the hallmark of the last 3 years in the Labour Party, where you have a position on something and you dig and dig and dig and dig, and you get all the bad media, you get all the bad faith from other people, and then you just submit to what they wanted anyway. We saw that with the IHRA. The Labour rightly accept the IHRA definition, but the political problem was the examples. They hold out. You get weeks of bad press. You get weeks of attacks. You're denigrated universally across the media, and then you do what they wanted you to do anyway in the first place. And I think it's a very similar story with trigger ballots. You get all the overhead of the mandatory selection stuff, right? So Keir Starmer, there was a motion in a branch meeting in Keir Starmer's CLP. There was a motion saying, what should we do about Keir Starmer's reselection? Nobody even said they don't like him, they wouldn't vote for him. For all we know, everybody in that branch would say, the sunshine comes out of Keir Starmer's backside. Of course we're going to reselect him. Just because it's a motion, it gets talked about on Twitter. And of course he was reselected.
That is what he did get very comfortably reselected.
Yeah, he was very comfortably reselected. And the point is, you get all the downside,
which he should have been, in my opinion.
Yeah. He's a great MP. You get all the downside, right, of the open selection stuff, and at the end of the day, the MPs generally stay, and people don't want to get involved in negative campaigning. So I don't get it. In a way, I actually prefer what we had before, right? Because at least you don't get the downside.
Well, no, I mean, to be honest, there wasn't much downside of it. I mean,
the downside is
no one really knows that we changed the particular mechanism of that it takes a third instead of a 50% of affiliated organisations.
The process is only just starting.
I think what this is showing, though, is that if we had mandatory reselection, the downside wouldn't have been that big. So
the downside
people don't follow this stuff.
The downside would be the same for a lot more, right?
Well, the downside would be worse, but
would it?
The outcome, yeah, because I think if you had if you see,
nobody's been deselected yet, Michael. Diane Johnson, she literally, it's just going back to people to choose.
That hasn't been a huge story. If you get people deselected, it would be a bigger story. No, but I'm saying it will be a bigger story if you had 20 MPs deselected via mandatory reselection, but it would be worth it. I don't think there's no point in pretending it wouldn't be a bigger story than it currently is, but it would be worth it because we're about to enter government with quite a lot of people who don't really have any interest in achieving the aims of a Corbyn-led Labour government, and that's very clear. That's why they're constantly hinting to journalists and to constituents, to people on the doorstep, that they don't actually want a Labour government but vote for them so they can, stop a damaging no-deal Brexit, or they don't even want a general election because they don't think their leader is very good. So what they want is just a referendum where they stop Remain and then ultimately, presumably afterwards, have, I don't know, some sort of Tory Lib Dem coalition while they sort of regather their forces and try and topple the democratically elected leader of the Labour Party.
The glue is going to your head.
The glue is going to my head. Oof. Should we dump the little David Cameron section?
No, we keep it.
All right. Should we go on to that now? Maybe I am getting woozy.
No, actually, I can't smell the glue anymore. People have just tuned in. We said at the top of the show that there's a kind of weird glue smell coming from downstairs. We were trying to instrumentalise that as a segue into helping us move to a new studio, go to support.novaramedia.com, but also explain how we don't, we haven't been getting high on a Friday night together for a long time, Michael. But this evening's an exception.
And next time we get high together on a Friday night, we want it to be by choice, not by necessity. And the way we do that is getting a new studio, which is ventilated, where we don't have anyone sort of like gluing tiles or whatever they're making downstairs. We have no idea.
Maybe they're just sniffing glue.
Maybe they are sniffing glue, yeah. But whatever's going on, we want a bigger studio where we can fit more of the Novara team in with us. This is especially important in a general election campaign because we want to create a bit of a newsroom where we have a bit more integration between the articles team, the video team, and the audio team. And to do that, we need more money. So if you are already a supporter of Novara Media, thank you very much. You are one, helping us be here today in this glue-filled room, and two, helping us move into.
You are helping us get high passively
to move into pastures new, which will allow us to make much fresher content.
Can I just say actually you were saying about the studio helping integrate audio, articles, and video? People are saying, "Oh, it's great that Novara is here, etc." And that means everything, because obviously we wouldn't exist without our supporters. But I think if we just had a slight bit more of money, like more money than we do, I look at the impact we'd have in the next general election. I think it could far outweigh the New Statesman. The New Statesman's been around for more than 100 years. It's owned by a millionaire. We're just like a bunch of people that originally started as a radio show on a community radio station, and now we're sitting in a shipping container. And, we're a variable for the radical left in this country. So I think it's really crucial. And that's not just to say we will do more of what we're presently doing. We want to do more investigative journalism. We want to do a lot more stuff outside of London, because we see massive deficiencies in the British media right now, left or right, which we want to help overcome. To help us do it, go to support.novaramedia.com.
And also like this video, keep your comments coming, share it on Facebook, share it on Twitter.
Some questions, we want some
make
questions.
Make sure you are subscribed as well to the Novara Media YouTube channel. You want to take some questions, or should we talk about David Cameron's new book?
Let's talk about Cameron first, because
quickly.
Somebody mentioned it actually in the comments, and I think it's really, really funny.
So David Cameron has out a new book, his memoirs. According to The Guardian, it's not going very well. It's not flying off the shelves. It's about 742 pages long.
Wow.
I think.
And I'm just going to apparently 100,000 words.
You what, sorry?
So it must have been like 1,000 pages plus.
Well, he's had 2 years in his £25,000 weird-ass shed. Anyway, let's go to... I'm going to read out a little bit of The Guardian article because it gives us some background of what's going on. So this is today in The Guardian. David Cameron's book is the fruit of 3 years' work, at least some of which is presumed to have taken place inside a £25,000 shepherd's hut. The much-anticipated publication next week of For the Record, David Cameron's 752-page book, promising a candid account of his time in politics, is blah, blah, blah. The stakes are high for everyone involved. A car crash was the view of a senior publisher at a rival to HarperCollins, which purchased the rights for a reported £800,000 in what was described as a hotly contested deal. The article goes on. We will probably get so this is now from a bookshop owner in Hackney. We will probably get one or two more people asking for it, but I'm not going to make not going to make a big thing. We might get firebombed. So there are many shops who don't want to stock this book because people are so angry at David Cameron. That's at Broadway Bookshop in Hackney.
Yeah,
probably give them your support.
But Broadway Market, I mean, that's quite an affluent, like, left-leaning part of the country, right?
And they'll be very pissed off about
Somebody was
Brexit.
actually shot at Broadway Market. I remember there was like a shooting there in that Argentine restaurant, wasn't there? Do you remember?
I don't remember.
My mate was in there and there was like bullets going into the...
Oh, fucking hell.
So maybe it would be firebombed.
I doubt that was about Brexit. I doubt that was a Brexit related.
No, it's pretty gang related. But I'm just saying, it's not hyperbolic that strange things
Brexit related drive-by. And it's only at 335 in the Amazon charts in terms of pre-orders. So it doesn't look like it's going to do very well. I mean,
where is it?
335.
So Grace Blakely's book's doing better than David Cameron's.
Yeah, hers is in the top 50.
It's in the top 100 now, but yeah.
Yeah.
And also,
hers is out. This is in terms of pre-orders, but in any case, it's not particularly impressive as to.
Mate, I mean, Michelle Obama and Barack Obama's were like number one, like months ahead of their publication.
Anyway, in any case, I'm not particularly surprised. I mean, this is not someone who is known as an interesting political thinker, an interesting political strategist, or a particularly insightful human being. He's a PR man. That's what his job was before he became Prime Minister. When he was Prime Minister, his job was, again, PR. It was to try and make George Osborne's austerity policy, which blamed nurses in Norwich and libraries in Nottingham for a banker's bailout, and then use that as justification for austerity, which, as you've said earlier in the show, cost 130,000 lives, if we are to believe the British Medical Journal, which to me seems like a sensible thing to do. And he is someone who will obviously be most remembered for the referendum, which again was a PR stunt. That was to try and get support for the Conservative Party away from UKIP, and unbeknownst to David Cameron, it would change the course of UK political history, and he did not plan for the alternative. Even though, I mean, The Guardian and from what it seems, the objective measures of the success of this book are that it's not going to be either particularly good or particularly successful. So I was surprised today when I went to do a weekly political review of the week on Talk Radio. We talk for what are the big headlines of the day, and it was quite a surreal one, because when we got there, they gave us this interview that had just been published in the Times. We'll go through some of it. I mean, it's all incredibly dull, to be honest. David Cameron's just given a promotional interview in the Times about this book, and the host, who's Dan Wootton, who's an executive editor of The Sun, was sort of saying to both of us,
executive editor. So what does that mean?
Executive editor.
Is he the editor at The Sun?
So, well, he's not the editor, but I think executive editor means there is an executive, which involves about 4 people, and he's one of them, and he edits it like once or twice a week.
So they edit it by committee kind of thing.
Once or twice a week, he's the editor.
He's on The Sun's Politburo. Exactly,
but he's an entertainment journalist. I mean, we get along well enough on the show. Obviously, we have completely different politics. But in any case, he's going through this interview saying this is going to be really headline stuff. This is a incredibly long-awaited book. This is, it's so interesting. There's so many big, like headline figures in this interview. What he said about David Cameron. No, obviously he is David Cameron. What he said about Boris Johnson. What he said about Michael Gove. And he's kind of backing a second. And it was me and someone who regularly writes to Spiked, and we were both like, I mean, nothing in this interview was interesting. And this argument was basically not about the political record of David Cameron, but whether there was anything of note in this interview or this book. Turns out, so I knew already that this was because, it's in the News International building. Talk Radio is owned by Rupert Murdoch. So is The Sun. So is The Times. This is someone cross-promoting their media content. That happens a lot on Talk Radio, where they especially go to things which are published in The Times or The Sun. But then I realised that the book itself is published by HarperCollins, which is also owned by Rupert Murdoch. So what you have is this weird, interlocking system where HarperCollins pay 800 grand for a book by David Cameron, which everyone is panning and is saying is going to be quite irrelevant and no one wants to buy. But then you have to have The Times, who do this big, puff piece interview with him. I mean, they're saying, so you've got from The Times, you can probably get up some of these quotes. They're saying, I spend 10 hours quartered in an opaquely windowed room at his publisher's office, reading the secret proofs of David Cameron's hugely anticipated memoir. On every page, I hear his good-humoured, pragmatic, occasionally exasperated voice. So a completely this is a complete puff piece by a Times journalist who is promoting a book by a politician who again was backed heavily by Rupert Murdoch, published by an imprint owned by Rupert Murdoch, which then gets promoted heavily on Talk Radio, which is also owned by Rupert Murdoch. And then you have, like me from Novara Media and someone from Spike going in there saying, like, this is all bullshit. And, like, we're obviously our politics is completely different. It's, he's saying, like, the referendum was great and it was great that Brexit won. I'm like, the referendum was a bit of a waste of time and we might as well remain. But what we're both agreed on is that this interview is shit and this book is going to be shit. And the only reason you're pretending otherwise is because you're paid by Rupert Murdoch for a living.
It's all public relations, isn't it? It's public relations posing as PR and publishing, but it's just literally public relations and marketing.
Client journalism, they call it, don't they?
Well, it's more than client journalism. It's more than client journalism, isn't it? What's happened is they're going, look at the pre-orders, it's shit. I want a puff piece in the Times this week. And they do it. And you can imagine that person taking it to the copy editor and they go, add a few adjectives here, object to this, say he was right, it was the right thing to do. Talk about how lovely he is. No, but it's kind of really shit, boring, dull, but no, shut up. Red line through there, that's it. Great guy, really looks great, sleeping well, looks young. Do you know what I mean? It's
it is exactly like his good-humoured, pragmatic, occasionally exasperated voice. Also, there is no headlines in it. So the whole article, I've read the interview.
It's a really dull piece.
I was going to sort of like read you out the choice quotes, but there's not really much to go with. We'll give you some of it. No, I can't even be bothered.
Go on, read
one.
So,
look, this is David Cameron's quotes now. It's not just the sort of brown-nosing quotes of the Times journalist who was presumably encouraged to boost the book that Rupert Murdoch will be profiting from. Look, so this is David Cameron. Look, having a referendum was not a decision that I took in any way lightly. I get very frustrated when I read, which I do frequently, that a referendum was held because of the results of the 2014 European elections. If you Google recent coverage, you'll see that I suppose that should be contemporary coverage. You'll see that in almost every newspaper. It's simply not true. The referendum was announced a year beforehand and I thought about it more than any other decision I took because I knew it was an enormous decision, but it seemed to me that there was a genuine problem between Britain and the EU with the Eurozone crisis and the development of the euro that needed fixing.
Wait. What's the euro got to do with
the euro has nothing to do with it. He's sounding like a Lexit person there. He's sort of saying, the reason we had to have a referendum to leave the EU was because of the way that the Troika treated Greece in the Eurozone crisis. It doesn't make any fucking sense whatsoever.
Maybe David Cameron will have a guest column in the Morning Star.
Exactly.
Help book sales. Okay, get a call from HarperCollins. Go, we've got a picture column to you. It's from the former Prime Minister David Cameron.
But no, the whole article is him sort of saying nothing was my fault. I was making decisions about this. I was making serious decisions in response to serious circumstances, and even though it didn't go particularly well, I was acting in a dignified manner. Obviously, he's not pushed on any of this because it's in a Times piece, which is promoting his book. It's all pretty.
The thing is, he's saying, it was a long-standing problem. Well, everything's a long-standing problem in politics. Homelessness is a long-standing problem. What did you do about that? Well, also, in-work poverty is a long-standing problem. NHS waiting lists were a long-standing problem. You made all those things worse. So I addressed the problem. No, you made these problems worse. You made the issue in regards to European Union worse. Nobody made you phrase the question of the referendum in such an open-ended way. Nobody made you campaign so poorly, Nobody made you have the referendum just 1 year after a general election when UKIP did phenomenally well. All these things were incredibly ill-judged.
And you also can't say that you were interested in democracy when you didn't plan for the alternative.
No.
He didn't. He planned that referendum to win it, to try and resolve tensions within his own political party and to try and neutralise UKIP. And nowhere in his decision tree or I don't think
it even goes that far, to be honest.
Whatever it was, he definitely had not considered that potentially the other side would win because he didn't give a shit about democracy. He gave a shit about his own personal standing in the public. He gave a shit about internal fractures within his party and trying to beat UKIP. And now he's written a whole 725-page book trying to launder his reputation, which of course is now being puffed up by News Corporation.
Well, he got paid £800,000 for it, and they realise they're going to lose a shitload of money. So of course, £800,000, and this guy has a house in the Cotswolds, a house in Cornwall, a house in London. He's worth maybe 10, 20 million pounds. His wife has even more money than he does, and he has the temerity to say that this was a national question that needed to be resolved. No, this was a minor debate within the right. You wanted to create party unity within the Conservatives. You tried to do that, and the consequence was you've created a constitutional crisis. You've created the biggest political fragmentation of this country in your lifetime, and you still won't take responsibility for it, writing in your £25,000 glorified fucking shed on wheels. You cunt. Hate the man. Hate the man. And that's not because he's a Conservative. It's because he's born into such privilege and such wealth, and he has so much money, and he still won't take responsibility for austerity, rising and work poverty, for destroying public services, for the idiocy of trying to reduce the deficit and actually making the poorest pay. And guess what? The deficit's still there. They said in 2010 it would go by 2015. We're in 2019, and it's still there. He can't take responsibility for anything. And I think, we talk about Boris Johnson as emblematic of a British state, a British establishment in crisis. That's partly true. I think David Cameron's the other side. Yeah, you have these glorified idiots who have no clue and are completely incompetent, but I wouldn't trust Boris Johnson to walk a dog. Fine. David Cameron, they won't take responsibility for when they make mistakes. It wasn't always like that. I don't politically agree with them, but there was a post-war generation of Conservative politicians who would fall on their sword for things. They'd say, this is undignified, I have screwed up, I have to take, the consequences. David Cameron won't do that.
T.H. Worth is saying, leave it, Aaron. He ain't worth it.
He's a cunt. He's a cunt. He is. I won't say that word for many politicians because, there's no point dressing up a political problem in moral language. You have a political disagreement with somebody, keep it political because that's really important for a number of reasons. I have many political problems with David Cameron, but the way he has responded to the outcome of the referendum, forget the sort of preamble and the politics beforehand. Since he's responded, the way he just resigned, whistling, going back into number 10 Downing Street, sort of singing to himself, the guy is just grotesque. And he oversaw a government where 130,000 people died as a result of austerity. I think it's a disgusting man, disgusting human being.
In the interview, actually, he says, I don't want people to think that I just walked away whistling, not caring. Honestly, he doesn't say sorry. He doesn't apologise for anything. He doesn't apologise for austerity or for, the constitutional crisis he's created. But he does say, no, look, I think about Brexit every day. It's like, we all fucking think about Brexit every day. Like, if the most, we have to think about it 5 times a day and we didn't cause this fucking mess.
Yeah.
So, you could do a bit more than think about it every day.
Imagine if you were an Italian cleaner or a young Spanish student that works in Pret-a-Manger in London. They fucking think about it every day. And guess what? They haven't got 3 homes and aren't sitting on a multi-million-pound fortune. You Oxford twat. True, I think about it every day. Yeah, it's a fucking side thought. While you're sitting in your shepherd's hut in the Cotswolds.
You're like, oh, that was a bit of a mess, wasn't it? That old Brexit thing.
They think about it while they're in work poverty, working in Pret-a-Manger in King's Cross. Fuck me. What qualified this guy to be the Prime Minister? Oh, sorry, I forgot. He went to Eton and Oxford and never worked a day in his life, stole a living. Sorry, I forgot. That's what qualified him. Oh, what qualified his successor? The exact same fucking qualifications. Sorry, I forgot. We live in a democracy where people that go to a school where you pay all this money, where you go to Oxford to learn PPE, which is literally an exercise in just regurgitating rote learning for the establishment, which means they can't ever deal with a crisis of this magnitude. That qualifies people to be, Prime Minister of a country like Britain, 65 million people. Their fates are determined by idiots of this scale. Really remarkable.
Let's take some questions.
Let's cool off.
Let's cool off with some questions. Do a little bit of mindfulness. Tell us in the comments, how do you best relax?
This is a great line from Charlie Hallam. David Cameron, necro pig fucker. It's an entirely apposite description of the man. How could you not interview David Cameron and not
ask about the pig? Yeah,
and say, look, are you a necro pig fucker?
Come on, give us some questions.
And put the rocket emoji.
Put the rocket emoji there. Abolish eating. I mean, it's not a question, but would you abolish eating? I mean, we would, wouldn't we? Come on.
Well, it's relevant because it's going to be something we talk about at a conference, isn't it? Abolish eating. Absolutely. It's amazing how some people say this country's a meritocracy, and then they'll defend the idea that you have schools like Eton, where people are they're literally paying to rig the system. That's the point of these things. They're paying to rig the system. They're not paying for superior education. It's just not true. It's just not true. I've met people that have gone to amazing state schools, and the single biggest indicator of educational attainment is still your parents, more than the kind of school you went to.
Well, they're not getting they're not getting an education which makes them fit to run the country, but they are getting. And I always make this argument because often you see on Twitter when the the annual debate comes up about how many people of colour or how many working class people Oxbridge has let in, and there's always this particular opinion, which is what we need to do is just not make such a big deal out of Oxbridge. What we need to do is say it doesn't matter what university you go to, and then it won't matter how many working class people or how many people of colour they let in. But I went to Oxford. Obviously, don't talk about it much on the show. From a comprehensive in East London. But I went to Oxford.
I didn't.
And it is...
Just the record, I refused to even apply because it's full of posh cunts. Like David Cameron.
It was,
And
yeah.
at 18, I was right.
But it is, you know, I've never seen so many resources in my life. You know, so it's not just a pretense that you get. Again, taught well is the wrong way to put it, because you get taught a very specific thing, which I think makes a lot of very, you know, terrible psychopathic people. But there is locked up in that institution, as well as there is in Eton, and this is the argument that someone like Holly Rigby makes very well. There is locked in these institutions so much wealth, so many resources, and it's not just that we should ignore Oxbridge or ignore Eton, it's that we should open up access to them and share out that overwhelming wealth that they are basically holding hostage. Because, I mean, the reason Oxbridge has it isn't because of anything they give back to the world. It's the fact that they own, you know, shed loads of England.
But Eton, I mean, Eton's like some 15th, 16th century buildings. What resources are those?
Well, they won't just have the building. So the whole point of...
No, but the resources, fundamentally, the value of Eton is in the networks, right? My son goes to the same school as this person's son, or, you know, and the point is, he's the son of a billionaire, and that opens up all kinds of opportunities to people. Well, but they're not educational resources. Oxford and Cambridge are very different.
No, I think they're quite... I mean, I don't know Eton, but I imagine it's quite similar, that you get, like...
You
have very small class... I mean, the value in Oxbridge is also in the networks, but you also have shed loads of money, because it won't just be the building. They'll have... What's that word where they have loads of sort of land and wealth and assets tied up? It's called, I don't know, legacy money, I'm going to call it for now. It has
patrimony.
No, it's not that either. Anyway, I don't like it when I have to think about a word when I'm...
It's the glue.
It's the glue. Yeah, it's the glue. Yeah, they have all this legacy money, which means they can provide, you know, 2 tutorials a week, one-on-one with sort of top professors or whatever. And so what we want to do is not just ignore these institutions, we want to open them up. We want to expropriate them fundamentally, or, you know, make them accessible to all.
This whole thing about Oxford and Cambridge being like the gold standard, I just don't think it's true. Like, Imperial College, if you want to study science, Imperial was fantastic. For anything to do with medicine, biomedical sciences, UCL is fantastic. And actually, like, in terms of global rankings for a lot of these subjects, these are great places. SOAS, if you want to learn like a language from a certain part of the world, or you want to be an expert in, you know, Mandarin, Chinese, and economics, SOAS is great. If you want to learn the social sciences, LSE is great. This obsession with Oxbridge is partly a class thing. I know a guy who's a friend of mine who was at UCL. His dad went to Cambridge, and it was like he had this like thing on his back his entire time at UCL. I have to go to Cambridge. He was having a fucking nervous breakdown. My dad went to Cambridge. I have to go to Cambridge. He eventually got into to do another degree. He did a second degree because like my dad went to Cambridge. I have to go to Cambridge. This is nuts. You're a smart person. You're young. Go start a business. Obviously, preferably worker-owned, right? Go get involved in some organisation that you're really passionate about. What makes you happy? Journalism, publishing. You want to go start a cafe? Whatever it is, manufacturing business, whatever. But no, it's about proving a point to his dad. I mean, it's just nuts. So, we're opening up these resources to people. Yeah, of course, there's partly an element of that. But I think it is all part, you know, also partly this strange... How does the establishment reproduce itself?
Yeah, it is in
country?
those networks. Yeah.
It's primarily through Oxford and Cambridge. That's not to say they aren't great universities. They are.
Our audience, with a much better vocabulary than me, about 10 people have now said endowment, which was the word I was looking for. Thank you very much. What would I do without you? Do you want to choose a couple of questions? Do you think the Guardian will come out for the Lib Dems again in the general election from Stewart?
Do I think...
They didn't come out for the Lib Dems in 2017, did they, surely? I think that was in...
They didn't come out for Labour.
Did they not?
I don't think so. The Independent came out for the Lib Dems, I think. The only people that come out for the Labour Party in 2017, and
I think it was in 2010 that the Guardian came out for the Lib Dems.
Yes.
I think.
Yeah, no, explicitly. No, they did.
And then
absolutely
I remember
explicitly.
In 2015, the FT came out for the Lib Dems because they wanted a continuation of
that was
the
it.
Condem coalition.
And the Independent as well came out for the coalition. It's just like, you live in such an establishment fairy tale, you can't even come out for a political party when we have a two-party system. I mean, it's unbelievable. They've become completely detached from any sensible conversation about the reality of this country. It's insane.
Oscar Saxby asked a question. Why do you pronounce Bath Path like a northerner if you're from East London? It's actually a good question. My mum pronounces it like that.
Well, there you go.
But she's also, she's from Malta, which is, a small...
You're half Maltese?
No, she's from... my granddad was stationed there as an engineer in the Second World War, so they lived there for the first 18 years of their life. But anyway, I've been thinking about should I try and change it, because I'm from London, but I have that like northern... What's it called? Like a short A or like a Bath Path, whatever. I've been thinking I need to change
James
that.
Has it as well.
I need to change that because otherwise it seems like
people won't believe this. James Butler, when he's had a few drinks, he actually says a few words like somebody from like Manchester. Exact same thing with the and I think it's because his grandma, who he was very close, something like that. James will say it, but it's weird, isn't it? I remember when I was about 4 years old, my dad, because he had obviously a foreign accent, his ex was French, and he was saying dangerous for dangerous. It's like he'd learnt this word off his French lady. He was Iranian, and he was speaking to his British English son. And I remember being 3, and I was like, Dad, why are you so stupid? It's dangerous.
Oh, that's so sweet. Wild Bunny.
Sweet.
Dudes, no, not that. That is also sweet. But I was saying Wild Bunny sweet. Dudes, I've not even earned a £5 in the last month, but what the hell? Navarra is awesome and gives me material with which to shut down right-wingers. Wild Bunny, we appreciate it so much. And with a super chat of a £5.
Well, Wild Bunny, if we
means
see
a lot.
Yeah, pull us up and say, I'm Wild Bunny. It'd be great to chat to you. If you're going to be at conference, TWT.
This is a really relevant and interesting question because it's quite likely, right? What would a Labour-Lib Dem coalition look like? Would Swinson's Lib Dems roll over for socialism like Clegg's rolled over for austerity? It's a very interesting question. I don't think there would be a coalition with Jeremy Corbyn.
No.
I think the Lib Dems have probably learnt from 2010. To be honest, have they learnt anything? If I were the Lib Dems, what I would have learnt is that actually going into a coalition is often not the best. We've seen what the Lib Dems did in 2010, and we've seen what the DUP did in 2017. And it is in a confidence and supply arrangement that you have a lot more control over the government than you do in a coalition agreement. So I imagine they would stay in a confidence and supply relationship. And I don't know what conditions actually they'd hold on Jeremy Corbyn. My assumption is that many of the social democratic policies essentially that are in the manifesto they would leave be. Potentially they'd have another go at electoral reform. Obviously, they'd be strong in terms of have a second referendum with Remain on the ballot. My guess is more that as soon as the going gets tough, as soon as there is any opposition from business or financial elites or from the media, which will happen quite soon, that is when the Lib Dems will be like, at this point we pull the plug. Right. Because they will ultimately be in that relationship. They'll be talking to people in the city. They'll be talking to the Conservatives. They'll be talking to all of the British establishment saying like, yeah, we'll pull the plug as soon as it gets remotely dangerous.
That's exactly right.
But we can't reject them. If the Lib Dems reject Labour the day after the election, I think that is going to be, potentially damaging for their revival. I think what they're going to do is they're going to have a confidence and supply relationship with the Labour Party and pull it out when it's most... I don't think it would be damaging for us, but when they think it puts them in the best light, where they can pay, we are the responsible party who have pulled the plug on this government in the national interest because potentially, there's some threat to the pound or whatever.
They'll play hardball with Labour far more than they ever did with the Conservatives. And the point is, that's because they institutionally represent a certain set of interests, which are affluent, wealthy interests. Who votes Lib Dems? Where do they come from? The Liberal Democrats have existed in this country, I think, since 1987, right? So they are the convergence of the SDP, a right-wing split from the Labour Party, and the Liberals historically. The Liberals haven't been in power in this country since the 1910s. Herbert Asquith was the last Liberal Prime Minister. 1910s, 1920, before 1920, I think. Maybe around 1920. And so they're irrelevant for most of the 20th century, right? They become relevant again because of this right-wing split from the Labour Party with the SDP at the end of the 1980s. Now, what have they achieved since the late 1980s? They claim to care about electoral reform. They claim to care about an elected second chamber. They claim to care about, a fair economy, expanding the autonomy of the individual, etc., etc. They've literally done nothing. All they've achieved in their time was propping up the austerity coalition where 130,000 people died. So I think the political function of the Liberal Democrats is really ambiguous to me. I don't actually think that they exist for any reason. I think it's merely an expression of a certain fragment of the British establishment wanting to tell themselves they aren't bad people. But they do want to maintain expanded role for markets. They are social liberals, I give them that. They are social liberals, but when it comes to running the economy, they're not that different from the Conservatives.
They are social liberals, but they were in coalition when the architecture of the hostile environment was created.
Well,
I mean, that's not particularly socially liberal policy, is
they
it?
claim to be social liberals. You know, you meet a lot of them. I was chatting to a guy at a festival. I did a talk about the book, and he said, "Look, I'm a liberal Democrat, and I just think Labour are too left wing." You know, but he was an intelligent guy. He thought of himself as a good person, as a nice person. It's all very moralising language, and that's why he was a liberal Democrat. There was no material account of what's happening in Britain. There was no materialist understanding of what's happened since the crisis, why austerity happened. There was no understanding, interpretation of politics really of being comprised of competing interests. He thinks that politics is about these people have been persuaded of this, these people have been persuaded of this, that's why they have these different ideas in their heads. It's like, no, people who are wealthy tend to prefer lower taxes because it's in their material interest. People who are on low income, who, you know, have to care for a kid who suffers from some health condition, they will favour a publicly funded NHS. It's not that hard. Yes, some people are persuaded of the merits of some things because of debate, etc. But generally speaking, these are expressions of material interest. They don't get that. They don't get that, and that's why I think, you know, the Liberal Democrats is really a safety valve for that part of the British establishment, wealthy people who think they're nice. That's literally all it is.
Max Holloway has given us £5 in the super chat for my dancing in the TWT promo vid. Thank you very much. That's actually a clip from an edition of Party Time, which was a short series I made about 2 years ago about how you can get involved in your local Labour Party. You can, I think, Google those probably. But that's a good segue to talk about TWT, because this will be starting... When does TWT start? A week from now, basically. A week on Saturday.
Week Saturday.
So there will be Tisky Sours, free of the 4 nights. So on Saturday night, Monday night and Tuesday night, we're going to have Tisky Sours with some incredible guests. I mean, it's already public on the TWT website, actually, so I'll tell you. So on Saturday, we're going to do an episode on the Green New Deal, because that's going to be debated on the conference floor. That's going to be with James Meadway, Sakina Sheikh, and Steve Turner, who's General or Assistant General Secretary of Unite. And we're going to, talk about some of the tensions between the trade union movement and climate change activism. Think about Heathrow third runway, etc. On the Monday, we're going to have a debate about Brexit with Yanis Varoufakis, Len McCluskey, and our very own Ash Sarkar. And on Tuesday, we're going to talk about the future of the Labour Party, how to win a general election, and that's going to be with Paul Mason, Grace Blakely, and David Lammy, MP. So I think you can imagine there's going to be some fire on the stage. I think there's going to be a small live audience. So if you are going to be in Brighton for TWT, make sure you get down there. On the Sunday, what me dancing in the video was advertising is the Novara Media Variety Show. It's going to be us getting politicians to do kind of stupid things on stage. There'll be audience participation. It's going to be very entertaining. There's going to be live music from Soweto Kinch, a good friend of the show. So if you are down in Brighton, come along to that. Say hi to us if you see us there. If you are not in Brighton, this will all be streamed live on our YouTube channel. So make sure you are tuned in at 8 p.m. on
Subscribe.
Make sure you subscribe. Hit the subscribe button, and that means that you get notifications whenever we go live. But
to get the notifications, they need to hit the bell button.
Oh, you need to subscribe and hit the bell button. But if you want to plan your evenings, they'll be all at 8 p.m. as usual, the Tisky Sours. And I think the variety show is from about 6 p.m. on the Sunday.
I won't be there.
But we'll be tweeting. You're going to be there, no?
I'll be there later.
Oh, okay.
On the Sunday, I'm doing a panel with Vince Cable and Yanis Varoufakis, of all people, in London.
Oh, fabulous. I didn't realise that.
Yeah, for the How the Light Gets In. This kind of like literary festival that's doing decamping to London for a bit. So that'd be fun with Uncle Vince. Maybe I'll wear a little hat like Vince.
Yeah, exactly. Ask him what he think would happen if... Actually, let's get Vince Cable on the show. Ask him on.
I think he saw me once. I was doing some freelance work somewhere, and he saw me, and his face, it was like he'd swallowed a wasp. But maybe you can interview him.
I walked past, I think it was Chris Leslie, about 2 years ago when he was still in the Labour Party, and it was my birthday last year, actually. And I was going to Politics Live, I think, to talk about the IHRA, sort of a nightmare media appearance with Jess Phillips on. But I saw, Chris Leslie in that little bit walking out of Parliament. And I was like, come on, Chris, say hi for a video. It's my birthday. And he was like, just walked up like that.
What's happened to that guy?
Yeah.
Oh my God, Change UK. And it's like Mike Gapes.
It's very sad.
Joan Ryan and Anna Soubry. I mean, my God, this is you can't imagine a bigger car crash.
Well, you're not going to bump into him at Parliament for very long. You know, I don't think when there's a general election, he will be returned to that institution.
He won't even get 1,000 votes.
He might get a job at which magazine?
He'll make Simon Dankshuk like a man of the people.
Anyway, this glue is going to my head now, so I think we should cut it unless there's.
Let's cut it.
Yeah,
let's cut it. I'm happy with that.
We are going to be back. I don't think I'm going to do a show on Monday, so next Tuesday.
Unless something crazy happens.
Unless something crazy happens, there might be an emergency show on Monday. If not, next week I'm planning a show on Tuesday and Thursday. Tuesday I'm hoping to have Anne Pettifor on. We're going to talk about the Green New Deal, but also whatever's happened over the weekend. So it'll be the big news stories as well as that. On Thursday, I'm going to have Lara McNeil on. Youth representative on the NEC.
Anne Pettifor, you got somebody else?
I'm not, maybe Ash, but she hasn't replied to my WhatsApp yet.
Right. Anne Pettifor's got a book out, so she's going to be a great guest.
Yeah, exactly. She's always a great guest. On Thursday, I'm going to have Lara McNeil, and it's going to be a conference preview. So obviously, we all know what's going on at TWT. You know what we're doing there now. But Lara can tell us what's going to be going on the conference floor, what are going to be the big debates going on, and what we can expect as the big outcomes. Will there be any rows, etc. So make sure you tune in to both of those shows next week. Thank you so much for joining me this Friday night, Aaron Bastani.
My pleasure. Have a great weekend, everyone. Hope to see some of you at TWT next week.
Have a great weekend. Again, thank you for watching the show. Thank you for all of your excellent comments, especially when you give me the words I cannot find. As ever, this is only possible because of your kind support. If you are already a subscriber, thank you very much. You are what makes Navarra Media and Tisky Sour possible. If not, please go to support.navarramedia.com. As you know, our ask is for the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month. If you feel like giving us a one-off donation so that we can move studio promptly, which will be good.
Don't do that. Studio.
How do you say studio?
Studio. You said studio.
Yeah, but I say
Do you say tomato?
No, I say tomato.
Look, I'm not an authoritarian. Look, I'm not in the Brexit party. You can say it how you like.
We're going to move studio. We're going to move studio if you give us some nice one-off donations. Good evening. Have a wonderful weekend. We'll see you next week.